The twin moons of Korath cast bloody shadows across the crystalline peaks as Zara pressed the serrated edge of her ancestral blade against the human's throat. Her violet skin gleamed with perspiration, and the ritual markings that traced her arms seemed to pulse with their own inner fire. The ceremonial hunt had led her through 3 days of relentless pursuit across the razor-sharp terrain. And now, finally, she had her prize. The human beneath her should have been trembling, should have been pleading for mercy in the broken fragments of her people's tongue that most off-worlders attempted when faced with death. Instead, he lay perfectly still against the obsidian ground, his dark eyes studying her face with an expression that bordered on amusement. His weathered features spoke of countless battles, and the scars that decorated his arms told stories of survival against impossible odds. "Any final prayers to your pale gods, human?" Zara's voice carried the melodic tones of her people, though. It was edged with the satisfaction of a hunt well concluded. The blade in her grip was a masterwork of Shadowclaw craftsmanship, its biometal edge sharp enough to part molecules, its hilt carved from the bones of a void whale her great-grandmother had slain in the depths of space. The human's lips curved into what could only be described as a smile. "Yeah," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion, but carrying an odd note of gentle correction. "You're holding it wrong." The word struck Zara like a physical blow. Wrong. The concept was so alien, so impossible, that for a moment she couldn't process what he'd said. She was Zara of the Shadowclaw, daughter of the Crimson Hunt, trained since childhood in the 17 sacred forms of blade work. Her grip was flawless thumb positioned for maximum leverage, fingers wrapped with the precise tension taught by the weapon masters themselves. The blade had never wavered in her grasp, not once in 12 years of training. Heat flared in her chest, a rage so pure it made the desert air seem cool by comparison. With a snarl that would have sent a crystal cat fleeing in terror, she drove downward with all the strength her lean frame could muster. A blade should have pierced flesh, should have ended this mockery with the swift justice her people demanded. Instead, something extraordinary happened. The human moved not with the wild desperation of prey, not with the clumsy panic of the untrained, but with a subtle shift that seemed to redirect the very cosmos around them. His shoulder rolled, his chest twisted, and somehow her perfect strike went wide. Worse than wide her grip, her infallible, generations-perfected grip, simply ... failed. The ancestral blade slipped from her fingers like quicksilver, embedding itself in the crystal sand with a soft whisper that sounded almost like laughter. Its ornate hilt stood upright, catching the moonlight like an accusation. Zara stared at her empty hand, her mind struggling to process the impossible. In 18 years of life, through countless training sessions and 3 successful hunts, she had never lost her grip on a weapon. It defied everything she understood about herself, about her people, about the natural order of things. How? The word escaped her lips like a prayer to ancestors she suddenly wasn't sure were listening. The human Marcus, she remembered from the intelligence briefing, sat up slowly, brushing crystal sand from his torn shirt with maddening casualness. "Told you," he said, and that insufferable half-smile was still playing at the corners of his mouth. "Mind if I have some water?" Desert's got a way of making philosophical discussions thirsty work. She should have lunged for her blade, should have struck him with her bare hands, activated the neural disruptors in her gauntlets, called down orbital fire from her ship. Instead, she found herself nodding, her mind too fractured by impossibility to formulate a proper response. Marcus reached for a battered canteen at his belt, his movements slow and deliberate, the universal sign of someone trying not to provoke. A dangerous predator. He drank deeply, his throat working as he swallowed, and when he lowered the container, his expression had shifted from amusement to something that might have been curiosity. "You really want to know?" he asked. "Tell me." The words came out as a command, but Zara could hear the desperate edge in her own voice, the plea of someone whose entire worldview had just shattered like poorly tempered crystal. Marcus leaned back against a boulder, settling in with the casual air of someone discussing the weather rather than the fundamental nature of combat. "Your grip's technically perfect," he said. "Textbook, even. I'm guessing you've been training since you could walk." "Since I could hold steel," Zara admitted, hating herself for answering. "Thought so. You've got all the forms down, all the muscle memory. Hell, you're probably faster and stronger than me." His dark eyes studied her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "But you're gripping like someone who's never been afraid to lose their weapon." The philosophy made no sense to her, but the demonstration had been undeniable. Zara reached for her blade, pulling it from the sand and checking its biometal edge for damage. The weapon was unharmed, its molecular structure still perfectly aligned. She settled into her stance, the seventh form, designed for close quarters. Elimination, and raised the weapon. "Show me again," she demanded. Marcus shook his head, that maddening smile never wavering. "Nah, once was enough to make my point. I said show me." The words erupted from her throat as a roar that echoed off the crystal peaks, but Marcus didn't even flinch. "And I said no." He stood, dusting off his pants with infuriating calm. "You're not ready to learn. You're just angry that someone broke your favorite toy." Before Zara could respond, he was already walking away, heading deeper into the crystal, maze with the steady gait of someone who knew exactly where he was going. She watched him disappear among the glittering formations, her grip tightening on her blade's hilt until her knuckles went pale violet. She could follow, could track him through the labyrinth, corner him where the passages narrowed, finish what she'd started. It would be easy, she knew these peaks like her own heartbeat, and he was just a human, limited by biology and circumstance. But as she stood there in the crimson moonlight, staring at the path he'd taken, Zara found herself thinking about his words, about the impossible moment where her perfect technique had simply failed, about the casual confidence with which he'd walked away, as if he knew she wouldn't or couldn't follow. The blade felt different in her hand now, still familiar, still perfectly balanced, but somehow changed by what had happened. As if the weapon itself was questioning everything she'd been taught about strength and skill, and the nature of victory. For the first time in her life, Zara, the Shadowclaw, stood motionless in the face of prey, her mind churning with questions that had no answers in any of the sacred texts. The hunt had ended, but something else, something far more dangerous and infinitely more compelling, had just begun. The crystal peaks sang their ancient song around her, but all Zara could hear was the echo of 5 impossible words. "You're holding it wrong." And somewhere in the depths of her warrior's heart, she was beginning to suspect that maybe, just maybe, he was right about more than just her grip. The aurora-lit training grounds of the Shadowclaw stronghold hummed with the familiar rhythm of blade work, but Zara found herself unable to concentrate on the ancient forms. 3 days had passed since her encounter with the human Marcus, and his words haunted her every movement. Each time she raised her ancestral blade, she felt the phantom sensation of it slipping from her grip, heard the soft whisper of impossibility as it embedded itself in crystal sand. "Your form is sloppy today, cousin." The voice cut through her, distraction like a laser through silk. Zara turned to see Nira approaching across the polished stone floor, her own blade dancing through a complex series of strikes with fluid precision. Where Zara's skin was the deep violet of twilight, Nira's was pale as starlight, and her silver hair fell in an elaborate braid that marked her as a member of the elite guard. They had trained together since childhood, but rivalry had long ago replaced any sisterly affection. "My form is adequate," Zara replied, settling back into the defensive stance of the third sacred form. Nira's laugh was like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, beautiful and cutting in equal measure. Adequate? From the hunter who was supposed to bring back the head of that human trespasser? She stepped closer, her blade held in a casual grip that somehow managed to seem more threatening than any aggressive posture. The entire stronghold whispers of your failure, cousin. They say you returned empty-handed, claiming your prey escaped. The accusation hung between them like a charged particle field. Zara forced herself to remain calm, though her grip tightened. On her weapon's hilt, he was resourceful. Resourceful enough to best a daughter of the Crimson Hunt? Nira circled slowly, her pale eyes never leaving Zara's face. Or perhaps the stories are true. Perhaps you've grown soft, spending so much time among the memorial crystals, mourning your dead sister instead of honoring her memory with blood. The mention of Vera sent a spike of pain through Zara's chest, but she kept her expression neutral. Careful, Nira. Even cousins can push too far. Can they? Nira's smile was sharp as any blade. Then perhaps you'd care to demonstrate your prowess? A simple sparring match, nothing formal. Just two hunters testing their skills against each other. Zara knew a trap when she heard one, but she also knew that backing down would only fuel the rumors that already circulated through the stronghold. Like poison. She nodded once, settling into the opening position of the seventh form, the same stance she'd taken against Marcus just days before. They began slowly, testing each other's defenses with careful probes and conservative blocks. But gradually, the pace increased, and Zara found herself falling into the familiar rhythm of combat, her body moving through patterns drilled into muscle memory over years of relentless training. For several minutes, they were evenly matched. Nira's technique was flawless, her movements flowing like quicksilver, but Zara's strength and speed kept her competitive. Then, without warning, Nira attempted a complex disarming maneuver, a technique from the forbidden 14th form that required perfect timing and absolute commitment. And Zara, remembering Marcus's impossible demonstration, tried something different. Instead of meeting Nira's attack with rigid technique, she let herself flow around it, redirecting the force, rather, than opposing it directly. The result was startling. Nira's blade went wide, her perfect form disrupted by the unexpected response. For a moment, Zara had the advantage, could have pressed forward for a clean victory. But in that instant of triumph, she hesitated, thinking of Marcus's words about fear and certainty. The moment of doubt was all Nira needed. She recovered with serpentine grace, her blade finding the gap in Zara's defense and stopping just short of her throat. "Yield," Nira said softly, but her voice carried clearly across the training ground. Other hunters had stopped their own practice to watch, drawn by the intensity of their match. Zara stepped back, lowering her weapon in the traditional gesture of concession. But her mind was racing. For just a moment, she had moved differently, fought differently, and it had worked. The technique Marcus had demonstrated wasn't just a fluke, it was a different way of understanding combat entirely. Interesting, Nira murmured, her pale eyes narrowing as she studied Zara's face. That last combination wasn't from any of the Jembe sacred forms. Where did you learn it? I improvised, Zara said carefully. Improvised? Nira's voice rose slightly, carrying a note of shocked disbelief. We are daughters of the Crimson Hunt, inheritors of techniques perfected over centuries. We don't improvise, cousin. We execute with precision and honor the traditions passed down through our bloodlines. The gathered hunters murmured agreement, their voices creating a low susurrus of disapproval. Zara felt the weight of their judgment, the pressure of expectations that had shaped her entire life. But underneath it all, she felt something else, a spark of curiosity, of possibility, that refused to be extinguished. That night, she found herself at the memorial crystals, where her sister's essence had been preserved according to ancient custom. Vera's image flickered within the translucent stone, frozen at the moment of her death, her expression serene despite the circumstances that had claimed her life. "I don't know what to do," Zara whispered to the crystal. "Everything I was taught, everything I believed about strength and skill, it's all been called into question by a single human who shouldn't have been able to best me." The crystal pulsed with soft light, but offered no answers. Vera had died in honorable combat, following the forms perfectly, executed by an opponent who had fought dirty and without regard for tradition. Her death had driven Zara to perfect her own techniques, to ensure she would never make the same mistakes. But what if perfect technique wasn't enough? What if there were things beyond the sacred forms, knowledge that existed outside the carefully preserved traditions of her people? A soft sound made her turn. Marcus emerged from the shadows between the crystals, moving with that same casual confidence she remembered from their encounter. He should have been impossible to find here, in the heart of the Shadowclaw stronghold. But somehow he had managed it. "Impressive security," he said conversationally, settling onto a stone bench near Vera's memorial. "Took me 3 days to figure out the patrol patterns." "You're insane," Zara breathed. "If they find you here, they won't." Marcus's dark eyes reflected the aurora light dancing overhead. "Your people see what they expect to see. Guards patrol routes, not possibilities." Despite herself, Zara found his presence oddly comforting. "Why are you here?" "Because you've been thinking about what I showed you. Because you tried something different in training today, and it almost worked." His smile was gentle, lacking the mocking edge she remembered. "And because you're ready to admit that maybe, just maybe, there's more to learn than what's written in your sacred texts." Zara looked back at her sister's crystal, at the frozen moment of honorable death. "My people have fought and survived for thousands of years using these techniques. They're proven, reliable, sacred. They're also predictable," Marcus said quietly. "In a universe full of species and fighting styles and unexpected situations, rigid adherence to any single approach is a weakness, not a strength." "Then teach me," Zara said suddenly, surprising herself with the words. "Show me what you know. Help me understand how you made my grip fail." Marcus studied her for a long moment. "It's not just about technique. It's about adapting, about reading your opponent, about using their expectations against them. Are you sure you're ready to question everything you've been taught?" Before Zara could answer, another voice cut through the night air like a blade through silk. How touching. A Shadowclaw warrior begging lessons from prey. Nira stepped into the clearing, her pale form ghost-like in the aurora light. But she wasn't alone. 3 other hunters flanked her, their weapons drawn and ready. Zara's heart sank as she recognized them, members of the elite guard, loyal to tradition above all else. "Nira, wait," Zara began, but her cousin silenced her with a gesture. "I followed you from the stronghold, hoping to discover the source of your strange new techniques," Nira said, her voice cold with disgust. "I never imagined I would find you consorting with the very prey you were supposed to eliminate." Marcus remained seated, seemingly unconcerned by the weapons trained on him. "Evening, folks. Lovely night for a walk, isn't it?" "Silence, human." Nira's blade flickered in the aurora light as she raised it. "Your death was delayed, not canceled." "But—" Zara stepped between them, her own weapon drawn. "No, Nira, this isn't your hunt. It became my hunt the moment you proved incapable of completing it." Nira's pale eyes blazed with righteous fury. "And now I find you here, defiling the memory of our ancestors with foreign corruption. You shame not just yourself, cousin, but our entire bloodline." The other hunters spread out, creating a circle that encompassed both Zara and Marcus. Professional, efficient, lethal, everything the Shadowclaw were trained to be. But as Zara looked at their faces, she saw something else. Fear. Fear of change, of questioning, of the possibility that their perfect system might have flaws. "Step aside, Zara," one of the guards commanded. "Submit to judgment for your failures, and perhaps the council will show mercy." Zara felt the weight of decision settling on her shoulders like a gravity field. She could surrender, accept punishment, return to the safe certainty of tradition and sacred forms. Or she could choose the harder path, the one that led into unknown territory, where nothing was certain except the possibility of growth. She glanced back at Marcus, who nodded slightly, not commanding, not pressuring, just acknowledging her choice. Then she looked at Vera's crystal, at her sister's serene expression, frozen in eternal honor. What would Vera want? Safety and tradition, or the courage to forge a new path? "No," Zara said quietly, raising her blade. "I won't step aside." The words seemed to echo among the memorial crystals, carrying a weight that transcended sound. Around her, the elite guards shifted into combat positions, their perfect forms a mirror of everything she had been taught. But as Zara settled into her own stance, she found herself thinking not of the sacred forms, but of water flowing around. Obstacles, of adaptation and possibility, of a human's impossible smile as he walked away into crystal mazes. The confrontation was about to begin, and for the first time in her life, Zara wasn't entirely sure what techniques she would use when the fighting started. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt remarkably like freedom. The clash of biometal against biometal rang through the crystal grove like the death song of stars. Zara moved between the memorial crystals with fluid grace, her blade weaving patterns that belonged to no sacred form her opponents had ever seen. She flowed around Nira's perfect strikes, redirected the guards' coordinated attacks, used their own momentum against them in ways that defied every principle of traditional Shadowclaw combat. But 4 against 1 were impossible odds, even with her newfound understanding of adaptive technique. A guard's blade opened a line of violet blood across her shoulder. Another's strike grazed her ribs, sending fire through her nervous system. She was losing ground, being driven back toward the memorial walls where there would be no room to maneuver. Marcus moved. He didn't fight like the warriors of her people, with their elegant forms and ritualized movements. Instead, he fought like a force of nature using the environment, the shadows, the very expectations of their enemies against them. A handful of crystal sand blinded one guard. A precisely placed kick sent another stumbling into Nira's bladework, disrupting her rhythm. He moved through their formation, like water through stone, creating chaos where there had been order. "The human fights without honor," one of the guards snarled, trying to track Marcus's seemingly random movements. "Honor's a luxury for people who aren't outnumbered," Marcus replied, appearing behind the speaker and applying pressure to a nerve cluster that dropped the warrior like a stone. The brief respite gave Zara the opening she needed. She pressed forward, her blade dancing in patterns that combined the sacred forms with the adaptive principles Marcus had shown her. But even as she fought, she could see the end approaching. More guards were arriving, drawn by the sounds of combat. Soon they would be overwhelmed by sheer numbers. "Zara," Nira's voice cut through the battle like a laser. "Surrender now, and I will ensure your death is quick and honorable." Instead of answering, Zara did something that shocked everyone present. She lowered her weapon and stepped back from the fighting. "You're right, Nira," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the grove. "I have dishonored our traditions. I have consorted with prey and embraced foreign techniques. I have questioned the wisdom of our ancestors and found it wanting." The guards hesitated, unsure whether this was surrender or strategy. Even Marcus paused, his dark eyes questioning. "But I am not ashamed," Zara continued, her violet skin gleaming with perspiration and blood in the aurora light. "I have learned More about true strength in 3 days than in 18 years of following the sacred forms. And if that makes me unworthy of the Shadowclaw name, then so be it. She raised her ancestral blade above her head, and with a swift motion that made several guards gasp, drove it point first into the stone floor of the memorial grove. The biometal rang like a bell as it penetrated the ancient rock, standing upright like a monument to everything she was abandoning. "I exile myself," Zara declared, her words carrying the formal weight of ritual pronouncement. Let no one say that Zara of the Shadowclaw lacked the courage to face the consequences of her choices. The silence that followed was absolute. Self-exile was almost unheard of among their people, a drastic step that severed all ties to clan, family, and tradition. But it also carried a weight that even Nira couldn't ignore. Ancient law protected those who chose the path of voluntary exile, granting them safe passage to the borders of Shadowclaw territory. "You fool," Nira whispered, her pale features twisted with something that might have been grief. "You throw away everything your birthright, your honor, your place among our people, for what? For the corrupting influence of alien ways? For the possibility of growth," Zara replied simply. "For the chance to become something more than what I was bred to be." She walked to where Marcus waited, noting how he kept himself positioned between her and the guards despite the formal protection. Her declaration should have provided trust, but verify another of his lessons in action. "Well," Marcus said quietly, "that's one way to win a fight. Though I have to ask, do you have any idea where we're going to go?" Zara looked back at the memorial grove, at her ancestral blade standing like a gravestone among the crystal monuments to the honored dead, at Nira and the guards, their perfect forms frozen in confusion and outrage, at the aurora-painted walls of the only home she had ever known. "Anywhere but here," she said, and discovered she meant it. The transport ship Wandering Star was hardly impressive, a cobbled-together freighter that looked like it had been assembled from the spare parts of a dozen different vessels. Its captain, a grizzled human named Torres, had been willing to take on passengers with minimal questions asked, provided they could pay in untraceable credits, and didn't mind traveling in the cargo hold. Zara sat on a crate of medical supplies, watching the Star's wheel pass through a small porthole. 2 weeks had passed since her exile, and she was still adjusting to the strange sensation of being untethered from everything she had once considered permanent. No clan obligations, no ancient traditions to uphold, no ancestral expectations weighing on her shoulders like gravity. It should have felt liberating. Instead, it mostly felt terrifying. "Having second thoughts?" Marcus asked, settling onto an adjacent crate with the easy grace she had come to associate with him. "Every moment of every day," Zara admitted, "but I don't regret my choice. I just wish I knew what comes next." Marcus pulled out a battered datapad and began scrolling through what looked like job postings. "Next, we figure out how to make a living. Torres tells me there's good work for independent operators in the Meridian Sector corporate conflicts, territorial disputes, the kind of situations where traditional military forces are too recognizable but skilled individuals can make a difference. Mercenary work," Zara said, tasting the unfamiliar concept. "Security consulting," Marcus corrected with a wry smile. "It sounds more respectable that way. And before you ask, yes, it means fighting for money instead of honor. But it also means choosing our battles, working for causes we believe in, and never having to follow orders that contradict our conscience." The idea was both alien and appealing. Zara had been raised to serve her clan without question, to channel her skills toward predetermined goals chosen by others. The notion of personal agency in combat, of selecting her own enemies and fighting for her own reasons, carried a dangerous attraction. "Will you teach me?" she asked. "Not just the fighting techniques, but everything else. How to read situations, how to choose contracts, how to survive in a universe where nobody cares about your bloodline or your traditional training. Marcus looked up from his datapad, his dark eyes serious. Are you sure that's what you want? The life I lead. It's not glamorous, Zara. Most of the time it's dangerous, uncertain, and lonely. No clan to fall back on, no traditions to guide your choices. Just you and whatever principles you can carry in your own heart. Zara thought of Neera's pale fury, of the memorial grove where her ancestral blade still stood like an accusation, of the suffocating weight of expectations she had carried since childhood. Then she looked at Marcus, scarred, battle-worn, free in ways she was only beginning to understand. Teach me, she repeated, and this time her voice carried no uncertainty. At all. Marcus nodded slowly. All right, but we do this properly. No rushing ahead because you think you understand something you don't. No falling back on old habits when things get difficult. And no romanticizing what we're about to become. Sometimes the right choice is still the hard choice, and you won't always like the person you have to be to survive. I understand. Do you? Marcus set aside his datapad and leaned forward, his expression intent. Because once we start down this path, there's no going back. Your people will never accept you again, and the universe doesn't care about redemption, arcs, or second chances. We succeed or we die, and most of the time success just means living long enough to face the next impossible situation. Zara met his gaze steadily, thinking of her sister's crystal memorial, of perfect forms that had failed when they mattered most, of the moment when her certainty had crumbled in crystal sand. My people already consider me dead, she said. And I've already discovered that everything I thought I knew about strength was wrong. What's one more impossible situation? Marcus studied her face for a long moment, then smiled, not the mocking expression she remembered from their first encounter, but something warmer and more genuine. All right then. Lesson 1. Information is more valuable than ammunition, and preparation beats improvisation every time. We start by researching our potential contracts, understanding the political situation in the Meridian sector, and figuring out what kind of reputation we want to build. He handed her the datapad, and as their fingers brushed in the transfer, Zara felt something spark between them, not just the student-teacher dynamic they had established, but something deeper and more complex. She saw it reflected in his eyes too, a recognition of possibility that had nothing to do with combat techniques or mercenary work. Marcus, she said quietly, her voice carrying undertones she hadn't intended. I know, he replied, just as softly. But not yet. You need time to figure out who you are when you're not defined by clan expectations or exile status. And I need to be sure you're choosing this life, choosing me, for the right reasons. The wisdom of his restraint was obvious, but that didn't make it any less frustrating. Zara nodded, forcing herself to focus on the datapad and the scrolling list of contracts, opportunities, and dangers that awaited them in the Meridian sector. But as the wandering star carried them toward an uncertain future, she couldn't help but notice how Marcus's presence seemed to fill the cargo hold with possibilities she had never dared to imagine. The universe was vast and dangerous, and utterly indifferent to her personal transformation. But for the first time in her life, it felt like a gift rather than a threat. She was Zara no Clan now, exiled daughter of a proud people, student too. A human mercenary who had shown her that strength came in forms her ancestors had never conceived. And as she began to read about the conflicts and opportunities that awaited them, she discovered that she was eager to find out what kind of person she might become when all the old certainties were stripped away. The stars wheeled past the portal, countless points of light in an infinite darkness, each one representing possibilities that had never been catalogued in the sacred texts of her people. And for the first time since childhood, Zara felt truly free to choose her own path among them.